If you've written a book and intend to get it in the hands of readers, one of the key decisions you'll have to make is how you want to go about publishing it. Historically, the only way to publish a book was to have it printed and distributed by a publishing house. These days, you have multiple different avenues for publishing, traditional publishing and self-publishing being the main options, but there are also new hybrid publishers emerging. These different publishing paths can be complex to navigate, and it can be overwhelming to choose the best option for your book. So today, I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of traditional publishing specifically, as I realize the traditional publishing process can be a bit of a mystery to new writers, and many don't understand the ins and outs of how it works. Now, when I say traditional publishing, I am referring to the big 5 publishing houses. These are Penguin Random House, Macmillan, Hachette, HarperCollins, and Simon & Schuster. It was recently announced that Penguin Random House bought Simon & Schuster, so going forward there will really only be the big 4 publishing houses, but that's a whole other topic that we can get into either in the comments or in a future video. I worked in the editorial departments of 2 of these major publishers, so I've seen firsthand the advantages and disadvantages of publishing your book in this way. It's worth emphasizing that everyone has their own view on the topic. So you'll find tons of resources out there with other people's views on the pros and cons of traditional publishing, but here I'm speaking from my personal experience and background. So before diving in, it might be helpful to watch my brief overview of how the traditional book publishing process works from start to finish, so I'll link that above. I post videos like this with publishing advice and writing tips weekly, so if you find these topics interesting or helpful, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my uploads. Alright, let's get started by going through the pros of traditional publishing. The first point is one of the main reasons why writers try to get their books traditionally published. It just holds clout. The big 5 publishers all have a strong reputation and name recognition. If you tell someone that your book has been published by Penguin Random House, for instance, they're going to likely be pretty impressed. While clout obviously isn't everything, and it certainly shouldn't be the only thing you consider when deciding how to publish your book, it is a key factor that we just can't ignore. People want their books published by a major publisher for the same reason people want to go to Ivy League schools or people want to work at impressive Fortune 500 companies. It helps to give your book credibility, and it immediately garners a certain level of respect. The second pro of traditional publishing is that these publishing houses have a wide distribution network, meaning you will get to see your books in classic brick-and-mortar stores like Barnes & Noble. In some cases, you might even see your book at airport newsstands or translated into other languages and distributed in other countries. The big 5 publishers all have relationships with the main book distributors in the US, so they're able to get a lot of visibility for your book. If you don't publish traditionally, it'll be much less likely for a distributor, especially a big corporate one like Barnes & Noble, to agree to stock your book. So if your dream is to see your book sitting on the shelves next to some of your favorite authors, your best bet is to go the traditional publishing route. The third pro of traditional publishing is that you'll get to work with a professional team. This includes, at a minimum, your literary agent and your editor at the publishing house. Working with these publishing professionals means you're going to have some of the absolute best editorial minds working with you on your book. Your agent and editor are both going to offer invaluable feedback on how to strengthen your manuscript and position it for success in the market, because they understand what readers are looking for and they care deeply about your story. That type of support is, at least in my opinion, invaluable if you are serious about becoming a successful author. Having this professional team behind you also means that you have people to back you up and provide advice and insight throughout the entire publishing process. Your agent can advise you on how to negotiate your book deal, for instance, and your editor can advise you on which genre your book best fits under. In other publishing scenarios, you most likely will be working much more independently and you won't have immediate access to that type of professional insight. In traditional publishing, your agent and editor will be there to hold your hand throughout the entire experience. The fourth pro of traditional publishing is that there is no upfront cost to you. With self-publishing and some other publishing options, you're going to have to pay to have your book printed, and whatever platform you use will ultimately take some kind of fee on every book purchased. In some cases, it can add up to a pretty hefty upfront investment to publish on your own. The traditional publishing process, on the other hand, costs you nothing but your time and energy. It doesn't cost anything to query literary agents, for example, and when your agent sells your book to a publisher, you'll be the one getting a check. That check is called an advance, and it's the price that publishing house pays you for the rights to publish your book. It's worth mentioning that the agent will take a commission on that advance, which is typically 15%. But the bottom line is that the Big 5 publishers pay you, while many self-publishing options require you to pay them. So those different financial dynamics are really important for you to consider when you're deciding how to publish your book. The final pro of traditional publishing is that the publishing house will bear most of the burden of marketing and sales. When I talk to authors who are hoping to publish their first book, many have anxiety about how to advertise it and how to find their readership. Writers often wonder, for instance, if they need to have a huge social following to be successful in publishing. The good news is that with traditional publishing, most of the marketing and sales work will be on the publishing house. After all, the publishing house will have dedicated marketing and sales teams who are committed to getting your book in readers' hands. You will, of course, be looped in on any marketing and sales plans related to your book, but you won't be expected to make those plans from scratch or do a ton of self-promotion. So if marketing and promoting your book make you feel a bit squeamish, this is a big advantage of going through the traditional route. So now that we've talked through the biggest pros to traditional publishing, we need to talk about the main cons. The first con with traditional publishing is simply the amount of time it takes to get your book published by a major publisher. First, you have to embark on the journey of finding a literary agent, which can take months or even years. This involves writing a pitch letter called a query letter and sending it along with some sample pages of your manuscript to the agent for their consideration. If you're in the process of trying to find a literary agent, check out my video on the top 5 elements of a successful query letter, which points out some helpful tips and tricks to ensure your query letter catches their attention. So then, after you find an agent, it can take a while for them to find an editor who is ready to make you a book deal offer. In some cases, the first editor that the agent reaches out to will be interested and will make an offer. But in other cases, the agent has to reach out to a dozen editors before someone bites. So it will take some time to close the book deal. Then, after the book deal is signed, you're going to have to play another waiting game. On average, it will take a minimum of a year for a publishing house to release a book after signing the book deal with an author. But sometimes it can take 2 or even 3 years. That's because the book will go through several rounds of editing, including developmental editing with your main editor, as well as copy editing and proofreading. Then, the book has to be formatted, the cover has to be designed, and the marketing and sales plans have to be solidified. Then, of course, the book has to actually be printed. So the traditional route is a long process. There's no doubt about that. You will need a lot of patience if you decide that this is the right publishing path for you. The second con of traditional publishing isn't necessarily a true con, but to some writers it might be. You must be willing to collaborate if you want to be traditionally published. As I discussed before, you will have a whole publishing team behind you, and you'll need to be willing to work with both your agent and your editor on revisions in order to make your book a success. You will also need to be willing to collaborate on things like the cover design. While the publishing house will do everything they can to retain your creative vision, they are also ultimately the professionals, so you'll need to be open to listening to their advice. If you want things done your way and your way alone, you should opt for another publishing avenue. The final con of traditional publishing is something I alluded to earlier. You will ultimately be sharing the profits that you make on your book. Your agent will take 15% of your book deal advance, as well as 15% of any royalties that you make on your book sales. Now, keep in mind that you will retain the other 85%, and remember that I said traditional publishing involves no upfront costs. But the bottom line is that you do have to be willing to pay that agent commission if you want to be traditionally published. So there you have the main pros and cons of traditional publishing. I want to end by emphasizing the fact that traditional publishing is simply not the right path for everyone or every book, and that is completely okay. If this video has convinced you that traditional publishing is the right path for you, check out my other video on the 7 things you need to become a traditionally published author, which should help set you up for success on your publishing journey. Are you hoping to traditionally publish or self-publish? I'd love to hear more about where you're at on your publishing journey, and feel free to leave me any questions in the comments below about the publishing process. I'd love to help you out. And if you liked this video and found it helpful, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to keep bringing you publishing advice and writing tips every single week. Thanks so much for watching, and happy writing!